Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Josh Howie. NHS staff are more likely than members of the public to perpetrate anti-Semitic abuse in hospitals and doctor surgeries since the October 7th Hamas attacks, according to complaints compiled by an influential charity. The report includes incidents such as a doctor being given a hijab as a secret Santa present and a patient having pro-Palestine stickers plastered across his room as he lay fighting for his life. The Community Security Trust found that the number of complaints of anti-Semitism in the NHS has tripled since after October 7th. Joining me now in the studio is journalist Nicole Lampert. Hello. Nicole, thank you so much for coming in. This was quite a shocking report that came out, and it was then in the Times this week. Is the NHS safe for Jews?
Well, this is the latest in a series of reports, and just this morning I was speaking to a friend who's quite active in campaigning against anti-Semitism, and he said to me, I'm going in for surgery, minor surgery, in the next few days, and I'm worried, and that's where we're at, where Jewish people sometimes have their ethnicity on their medical records because there are certain genetic things that are specific to Jews, and they're asking for their religion to be taken off of their medical records because that's how frightened people are.
Wow, because there was this incident, I think it was last year, where in Manchester there was a Jewish boy. He went in with his yarmulke and tzitzis, and supposedly a nurse with a pro-Palestine badge basically was very rude to him, and he was getting a blood transfusion, but he had to move and sit on the floor. And then they went back, I think a week later, without anything that identified them as Jewish, and suddenly they were treated absolutely fine. Yeah,
this is the big worry, and it's not just patients, it's Jewish staff that work in the NHS too that are finding it from their colleagues, and Jewish students who are medical students. I know personally of an incident where one Jewish medical student has moved universities because from October 7 she was dropped by everybody, and suddenly none of her friends would talk to her, just simply because she was Jewish.
And these are going to be our future GPs, doctors, surgeons.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Yeah, and I believe I read another incident where some therapists, there was someone in their group who was publicly supporting Hamas, a terrorist organisation, of course, and they complained about it, and they were then reported for microaggressions.
Yeah, and for Islamophobia. And this is one of the problems. The GMC, which basically is the regulator for doctors, they don't seem to understand anti-Semitism. They've had about 400 complaints since October 7.
They also don't understand what a woman is, but that's separate.
Exactly. Well, it's separate and the same. It's you know, possibly this kind of omni-cause. Palestine is part of the omni-cause, as are trans rights. So therefore, people that are outside of the omni-cause are not deemed sufficient for their help. It's a kind of the Jews don't count story. So they don't understand anti-Semitism. So therefore, even when you've got doctors who are going on about Jews drinking blood, or there's a GP still working who was calling for jihad a few days after October 7 and was the leader of what has now been prescribed as a terrorist group, still working as a GP.
I mean, that seems utterly incredible to me. And whose fault is that he's still allowed to practice it? Is that down to the
GMC? West Streeting, he's met with Jewish doctors. He met, and in September he pledged to do more to fight anti-Semitism in the NHS. But we haven't really seen any action, and that's what we need to see. We need to see the GMC having anti-Semitism training. There was anti-Semitism training in some NHS trusts, and then some of them got a letter saying don't go to the anti-Semitism training. This is the kind of fights that are going on every day within our NHS, and that's for doctors who just wanted to get on with their job, the Jewish doctors, and it's for Jewish patients who are increasingly worried about going into hospital. What might they face? Yeah,
and it doesn't seem like, I mean, I imagine the NHS is going to go, we're against all forms of racism and the usual stuff, but until we actually see some level of action, then Jews, I guess, better not get sick.
Yeah.
Or go into accounting.
Yeah, or just, in terms of not getting sick, just hide who you are.
Yeah, I mean, that's terrible that an ethnic minority would have to take those kind of actions to receive the same kind of healthcare that the rest of the country.
The NHS should be completely political neutral. You know, that is the basics of being a doctor. You'll treat whoever it is. if it's a rapist or a bomber, you still treat them because that's your job. But we're finding that people aren't being treated in the same way simply because they're Jewish.
And by the way, I know we're in the UK, but there was that incredible video in Australia where 2 Australian nurses were talking publicly and proudly about how they had murdered Jews, and it seems like they've now both finally been arrested, but it's taken weeks for there to be action on this.
Yeah, and after that happened, then 50 Muslim groups in Australia came out and said that it was Islamophobia and that they were just joking.
So, OK, let's get a little bit more into this. Why is it the NHS in particular then? Can we talk about, I'm going to say it because I believe there's a higher proportion of Muslim staff possibly there. Now this, I'm not proving this, but we do know that a large proportion of Muslims are unfortunately anti-Semitic. That's a fact. That's been proven before.
Yeah.
So it would suggest if there is a high proportion of Muslim staff in the NHS, as nurses, as doctors, GPs, then of course that would correlate with, unfortunately, what we're seeing.
That's one of the problems, and obviously the NHS is dependent on foreign workers. So they may come from countries where anti-Semitism is rife. So that's one element. And then there's just the other element, which is,
it's fashionable.
It's fashionable. So you've got people in their uniforms, in their nurses' uniforms or their doctor scrubs, going on the pro-Palestine marches. And these are people, doctors and nurses of every colour. And they're not meant to go out in their scrubs, but some of them are openly doing it. And we've reported on it and nothing's happened as a result of it. And they go into the hospitals and they're wearing their Palestine colours on their lanyards, and they're not meant to do that either. And sometimes they might be told off and then they might not wear them for a few days and then they're back wearing them. So I think it's a big problem. Part of it is, I'm sure, because there are lots of Muslim people that work in the NHS, but it's certainly not Muslims, and of course it's not all Muslims. And I'm sure that there are some who are sympathetic towards their Jewish colleagues because they are also an ethnic
Muslims,
minority.
Absolutely, who are. It seems like, as we've seen from the figures, is that it's a problem that's increasing as well. So it's not going away. Whatever the NHS has done has not worked. And we are reliant on the NHS.
The NHS is sick at the moment. There's a real poison at the heart of it. And this will affect all of us, not just Jewish people, but the way that the NHS is being radicalised. And something needs to be done about it. Wes Streeting needs to get serious now. He's said the words. That there should be no tolerance for it. But now he needs to do something about it. He's the health secretary.
Yes, when it comes down to his education. But by the way, obviously it's not just the NHS.
Yeah.
But the NHS plays such a... we've seen it in schools. You came on this very show a few months ago to talk about schools. It's permeate. How are we going to uproot it? Is it education? Is it having classes so people can actually understand? I can understand if people have been fed propaganda, have believed the lies that have been out there, and it's a complicated issue, Israel and all of it. It's complicated, so I can totally understand that. And of course, when you're seeing some of the images that they're seeing, of course they're heartbreaking, and some of them, frankly, also are fake. But that's a separate discussion. But is it education? Is that the answer? Is it just enforcement also? That's what it needs?
I think it's a bit of both. So I think people have to be educated about what anti-Semitism is. It's very complicated. But if you're talking about blood-sucking or baby killing...
which has happened, by the way. GPs being called, like people working for the NHS, Jewish doctors being called, baby killers, supporting genocide. Then
people have to learn that this is an ancient myth which goes back more than 1,000 years, where Jews were thrown out of countries because they were accused of killing babies for part of their rituals. So I'm sure that if you explain that to at least some of them, then that might make them at least stop and think. And there also has to be enforcement. This has to come from the top. This has to come from Wes Streeting. This has to come from the GMC, and it has to come from the hospital trust leadership. They have to take it seriously. They have to show that they care about their Jewish patients and their Jewish workers.
Of course, because it just, again, what starts with Jews doesn't necessarily end with Jews.
Of course.
Either anybody who's not Jewish who shows any level of support for Jews or even going further.
Yeah, or the radicalised NHS will affect all of us. Like, do we want our NHS to be radicalised? Do we want it to be political? No, we don't. Of course we don't.
All right, well, thank you so much for coming in, Nicole Lampert there. Oh, wow. OK, so...